The worn leather jacket slipped from Marcus Thompson's shoulders like a prayer answered in reverse. Victoria Sterling's trembling fingers closed around the fabric, still warm from his body, still carrying the faint scent of honest work and fading cologne, as the November wind cut through San Francisco's financial district like a blade seeking bone. She wasn't supposed to be here. Shivering at a bus stop at 11:47 p.m., her Bentley abandoned 3 blocks away with a dead battery and no signal on her phone. The irony tasted bitter. America's youngest female tech billionaire, reduced to accepting charity from a man whose calloused hands spoke of labor she'd never known. "You don't have to," she whispered. But Marcus was already stepping back, his security guard uniform offering no protection against the cold that now claimed him. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. "Character shows when nobody's watching, son." Neither of them knew this moment would unravel 30 years of buried secrets, or that the jacket connecting them had once belonged to her dead father. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus Thompson had learned to count quarters before he learned to drive. At 30, his calloused fingers still performed the nightly ritual, separating coins into neat piles on the scratched kitchen table while his mother Dorothy dozed in her recliner, insulin pen resting on her lap like a loaded weapon against time. The Richmond District apartment smelled of menthol rub and yesterday's coffee, reheated 3 times to stretch the grounds. Dorothy's breathing carried the slight wheeze that came with rationed medication, each exhale a reminder of choices Marcus made in grocery store aisles, insulin or groceries, never both in full. $47.60, he whispered, stacking the last quarter. Enough for Dorothy's partial prescription, but not enough for her specialist appointment next week. The leather jacket hanging by the door, his father's last gift before the heart attack took him, seemed to watch Marcus's calculations with patient judgment. Dorothy stirred, her clouded eyes finding him with the instinct of mothers everywhere. "Working too hard again, baby." At 68, Dorothy Thompson carried herself with the rigid dignity of a woman who'd survived the Korean War era as a trauma nurse, who'd held dying soldiers and delivered breech babies in hospital corridors. Her hands, now spotted with age and trembling from blood sugar fluctuations, had once steadied scalpels and comfort alike. "Just paying bills, Mama." Marcus folded the $20 bills into his wallet, leaving the quarters for tomorrow's bus fare. 3 jobs kept them afloat: night security at Montgomery Tower, weekend construction when his back allowed, and food delivery on his ancient motorcycle between shifts. The apartment told their story in careful details. Furniture inherited from Dorothy's nursing days, photographs of Marcus's father in his construction uniform, prescription bottles arranged like sentries on the windowsill. Everything clean, everything worn, everything touched by hands that knew the weight of making do. Dorothy's medical alert bracelet caught the lamplight as she adjusted her position. The engraving read simple truths: type 1 diabetes, no known allergies, emergency contact, Marcus Thompson. What it didn't say was that her son had dropped out of UC Berkeley's engineering program to become that contact, trading his future for her present with the quiet determination of a man who understood that some equations couldn't be solved with formulas. "Your daddy used to sit right there, counting money for my nursing school," Dorothy said, her voice carrying the weight of memory. "Said investing in people was the only math that mattered." Marcus touched the jacket hanging by the door, feeling the worn places where his father's hands had rested. 3 blocks away, Victoria Sterling was discovering something in its pockets that would change everything. But in this moment, Marcus knew only the familiar ache of loving someone more than his own dreams. Tomorrow he would return to Montgomery Tower, where his security badge granted him access to a world of wealth he guarded but never touched, never imagining that world was about to reach back. The insulin prescription slip crackled between Victoria Sterling's manicured fingers like a financial document worth billions, yet infinitely more precious. She'd found it tucked deep in the jacket's inner pocket, alongside a grocery receipt showing $23.47 for items that spoke of careful poverty. Generic bread, marked-down milk, store-brand peanut butter. Dorothy Thompson, type 1 diabetes, Humalog insulin, $347. Insurance copay, $287. Victoria's penthouse office overlooked the financial district from the 42nd floor, glass walls offering a view of the city that never included people like Marcus Thompson. But here in her hands was proof that kindness lived in the spaces between skyscrapers, in the pockets of men who gave away their only warmth to strangers. "Rachel," she called to her assistant through the intercom, "I need everything you can find on a Marcus Thompson. He works security at Montgomery Tower." 24 hours later, the file landed on her desk with the weight of revelation. Night security guard, 3 jobs, UC Berkeley dropout, engineering program, 3.8 GPA before withdrawal. Mother, Dorothy Thompson, 68, retired trauma nurse, diabetic complications affecting vision. Father, deceased, construction foreman, heart attack at 45. The numbers told a story Victoria understood in corporate terms, but had never felt in human ones. Medical debt, student loans, rent that consumed 60% of income. Marcus Thompson was drowning in the arithmetic of American survival, yet he'd still given his jacket to a stranger. That evening, Victoria found herself standing outside Montgomery Tower at 11:30 p.m., the jacket folded carefully in her arms. Through the lobby's glass doors, she could see Marcus at the security desk, filling out reports with the concentrated focus of a man who took every responsibility seriously. She pushed through the revolving door, designer heels clicking against marble that cost more per square foot than Marcus probably earned in a month. He looked up, surprise flickering across his features before settling into polite professionalism. "Ma'am, building's closed except for authorized—" He stopped mid-sentence, recognition dawning. "You're the woman from the bus stop. I brought your jacket back." Victoria extended it toward him, noting how his eyes lingered on the fabric like it meant something beyond mere clothing. "I should have returned it sooner." Marcus stood slowly, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. "You didn't have to come all the way down here. Could have left it with the day shift." "I wanted to thank you properly." Victoria's voice carried an uncertainty foreign to boardrooms and investor meetings. "And I wanted to apologize for not offering to pay for a cab or—" "No need." Marcus accepted the jacket, his fingers brushing hers briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through Victoria, a reminder that human touch existed outside of business handshakes and air kisses. "Just glad you got somewhere safe." Victoria watched him shrug the jacket on, noting how it transformed him from anonymous security guard to someone's son, someone who mattered enough to inherit his father's clothes. "I found something in the pocket, a prescription slip." Marcus's face went carefully neutral, the expression of a man accustomed to hiding financial shame. "I'll take that back." "The amount—" Victoria began, then stopped. In her world, $347 was lunch for 2 at the right restaurant. In his world, it was the difference between his mother's sight and blindness. "I'd like to help." "No." The word came out harder than Marcus intended. "I mean, that's kind of you, but we manage fine." Victoria recognized the pride in his voice, the same stubborn dignity that had built her empire from nothing. But she also saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of caring more than one person should bear. "Of course," she said quietly. "I just thought, if you ever needed anything." As she walked back through the revolving door, Victoria caught her reflection in the glass. A woman surrounded by wealth yet impoverished by isolation, wondering if kindness could be learned or only received. Dorothy Thompson collapsed on a Tuesday morning while Marcus was counting quarters for her insulin. The thud of her body hitting the kitchen linoleum echoed through the small apartment like a gunshot, followed by the terrible silence that precedes panic. Marcus found her convulsing, insulin pens scattered across the floor, her medical alert bracelet catching the morning light like a desperate signal flare. "Mama, stay with me," he whispered, fingers trembling as he dialed 911. The paramedics arrived in 4 minutes that felt like 40 years, their practiced movements transforming his kitchen into a triage unit. Diabetic ketoacidosis, they explained. Too little insulin, too much rationing, her body consuming itself for fuel. St. Mary's Hospital smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Marcus sat in the emergency room's plastic chair, still wearing yesterday's security uniform, watching his mother disappear behind machines and tubes. The doctor's words floated past him like debris from a shipwreck. Critical condition, intensive care, financial coordinator would discuss payment options. The bill arrived before Dorothy regained consciousness. $47,000 for emergency intervention, ICU monitoring, specialist consultations. Marcus stared at the numbers until they blurred, understanding with crystalline clarity that his mother's life had a price tag he could never afford. His father's jacket hung heavy on his shoulders, weighted with the knowledge that 3 jobs would never be enough. "Mr. Thompson?" The financial coordinator's voice carried the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered impossible news daily. "We need to discuss your mother's ongoing care requirements." That afternoon, while Dorothy slept under the vigilant watch of monitors, a miracle arrived wearing scrubs and carrying a clipboard. The hospital administrator explained that an anonymous donor had established a medical fund for uninsured patients, and Dorothy's case qualified for full coverage. Marcus felt the world tilt sideways. "I don't understand. Who would—" "The benefactor prefers to remain anonymous," the administrator said. "Something about paying forward a kindness they once received." 3 days later, Marcus discovered the truth through an inadvertent slip from a billing clerk. The payment had been processed through Sterling Tech's corporate foundation, a charity Victoria had apparently established just days after their encounter. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She had played him, turned his mother's suffering into her personal charity project. He found Victoria in her penthouse office at Sterling Tech, 42 floors above the city where real people struggled with real problems. Her assistant tried to stop him, but the security guard's uniform still carried enough authority to get him through the door. "You had no right," Marcus said, his voice carrying the exhausted fury of a man pushed beyond his limits. Victoria looked up from her computer, her face cycling through surprise, guilt, and something that might have been relief. "Marcus, I can explain." "Explain what?" "How you decided my family was your entertainment. How you turned my mother's diabetes into your tax write-off." He threw the hospital paperwork on her pristine desk. "I don't need your pity money." "It's not pity." Victoria stood, her designer suit creating an invisible barrier between their worlds. "I know what it's like to need help and have nowhere to turn." "No, you don't." Marcus's laugh carried no humor. "You have no idea what it's like to count quarters for your mother's medication, to choose between insulin and electricity. You live in a tower made of money, looking down at the rest of us like we're some kind of science experiment." Victoria's composure cracked, revealing something vulnerable beneath the CEO facade. "You're right. I don't know what that's like. But I know what it's like to be alone, to have no one who cares whether you live or die." "So you decided to buy yourself a family?" Marcus shook his head. "That's not how it works. You can't purchase feelings like you purchase companies." "I never meant—" Victoria began, but Marcus was already walking toward the door. "Keep your money," he said without turning around. My mother and I will manage just fine without your charity." The elevator ride down 42 floors felt like falling through the layers of his dignity. Marcus emerged onto the street level knowing he had just thrown away his mother's lifeline, choosing pride over practicality. But something in his father's jacket seemed to whisper approval. Some debts, it suggested, were too expensive to pay, regardless of the cost of refusing them. Above him, Victoria stood at her office window, watching his figure disappear into the crowd, wondering if kindness could ever be anything more than another form of currency in a world that measured everything by its price. The coffee shop on Geary Boulevard existed in the space between worlds, too upscale for Marcus's neighborhood, too humble for Victoria's usual haunts. Dorothy Thompson sat in the corner booth, her clouded eyes fixed on the woman across from her with the intensity of someone who had spent decades reading people's pain. "You're the girl who gave my son sleepless nights," Dorothy said, wrapping arthritic fingers around her ceramic mug. The coffee was her first indulgence in months, paid for by Victoria despite protests. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in the vinyl seat, her Hermes bag looking absurd next to Dorothy's worn purse with its carefully mended strap. "Mrs. Thompson, I never meant to cause problems between you and Marcus. I just wanted to help." "Help?" Dorothy repeated, the word carrying the weight of a woman who had accepted charity and resented the necessity. "Your generation thinks help comes with a price tag. My generation knows it comes with understanding." The meeting had been Dorothy's idea, a phone call that had surprised Victoria with its directness. "We need to talk, Miss Sterling. About my son. About kindness. About things you don't understand yet but need to learn." The voice had carried an authority that bypassed assistants and corporate protocols. "Marcus is angry with me," Victoria said, stirring her coffee unnecessarily. "He thinks I'm trying to buy his affection." Dorothy laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Child, my son doesn't know the difference between charity and love yet. His daddy was the same way, too proud to accept help, too stubborn to see the difference between pity and caring." Around them, the coffee shop hummed with afternoon conversations, students cramming for exams, business meetings conducted over lattes, the ordinary symphony of lives intersecting briefly. Victoria watched an elderly man help his wife with her coat, their movements synchronized by decades of shared care. "I grew up in foster care," Victoria said suddenly, the admission falling from her lips like a confession. 17 different homes between ages 8 and 18. "I learned early that everything comes with conditions, that kindness is usually a transaction waiting to happen." Dorothy's expression softened, her nurse's instincts recognizing trauma even 30 years after retirement. "That explains the walls you've built, honey, but it doesn't excuse them." "I don't know how to care about someone without trying to fix their problems," Victoria continued. "It's the only way I know how to show love, by solving things, by writing checks, by making phone calls that make problems disappear." "Love isn't about fixing," Dorothy said, reaching across the table to touch Victoria's hand. Her fingers felt like paper, fragile yet surprisingly warm. "Love is about showing up. It's about sitting in the mess with someone, not clearing it away." Victoria stared at their joined hands, one spotted with age and honest work, the other manicured and soft from a life without calluses. "Marcus thinks I see him as a charity case." "Maybe you do," Dorothy said, with gentle honesty. "But maybe he sees you as something he can't afford, when what you really are is someone who can't afford to lose him." The conversation drifted to stories of Marcus as a child, of his father's sudden death, of the impossible choices that had shaped their family. Dorothy spoke of nights spent teaching Marcus to budget, of watching him grow old before his time, of the guilt she carried for being the burden that had stolen his dreams. "He never complained," Dorothy said, her voice thick with maternal pride and regret. "Not once. Even when he had to drop out of school, even when his friends went on to careers while he worked 3 jobs, he just said, "Family takes care of family, Mama." Victoria felt something crack inside her chest, a fissure in the armor she had built around her heart. How do I fix this? How do I show him I care without making it about money? You stop trying to rescue him, Dorothy said simply. Start trying to understand him. Stop seeing his struggles as problems to solve and start seeing them as the price he pays for love. Because that's what they are, honey. Every quarter he counts, every shift he works, every sacrifice he makes, it's all love made visible. As they prepared to leave, Dorothy fumbled with her insulin pen, and Victoria watched without offering to help, remembering the lesson about dignity and space. But when Dorothy's fingers trembled too much to manage the cap, Victoria simply reached over and steadied her hand, saying nothing, just offering support without taking over. "Thank you," Dorothy whispered, and Victoria understood that the gratitude encompassed more than the small gesture. Walking Dorothy to the bus stop, Victoria felt the weight of education she had never received in any classroom. This woman had taught her something about love that no amount of money could purchase. That caring for someone meant honoring their strength, not highlighting their weakness. As Dorothy's bus pulled away, Victoria stood on the sidewalk feeling both emptier and fuller than before, wondering if she was brave enough to love Marcus the way his mother had taught her, with presence instead of presence, with patience instead of solutions. The boardroom at Sterling Tech felt like a gladiatorial arena disguised as corporate sophistication. Victoria sat at the head of the mahogany table, 42 floors above the city where Marcus was probably beginning his night shift, unaware that his name was about to become ammunition in a war he never chose to fight. Harrison Crawford entered the room with the predatory confidence of a man who had spent months orchestrating this moment. At 45, Victoria's former mentor carried himself with the refined cruelty of old money and older grudges. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his Tom Ford suit impeccable, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Victoria," he said, taking his seat with deliberate slowness, "I trust you've had time to review my proposal." The hostile takeover documents lay spread before her like tarot cards predicting doom. Crawford Industries had been quietly acquiring Sterling Tech shares for 6 months, building toward this moment when he could force her hand. But Victoria knew this wasn't about business. It was about the rejection that had ended their relationship 3 years ago when she'd discovered his embezzlement and chosen integrity over love. "Your proposal is interesting, Harrison," Victoria replied, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. "Though I question the timing." "Do you?" Crawford's smile widened as he opened his leather portfolio. "Perhaps this will clarify my urgency." The photographs hit the table like physical blows. Marcus entering her building, Marcus in her office, Marcus at the coffee shop with Dorothy. Each image captured moments of innocent connection, but arranged to tell a story of scandal and impropriety. CEO Victoria Sterling's secret affair with security guard, Crawford read from a mock newspaper headline. Sources close to Sterling Tech report that the billionaire CEO has been using company funds to support her unemployed boyfriend and his diabetic mother. Victoria's board members shifted uncomfortably, their expressions cycling through confusion, concern, and calculation. These were people who understood profit margins and market volatility, not the complex mathematics of human connection. "This is ridiculous," Victoria said, but her voice lacked conviction. In the harsh, fluorescent light of corporate scrutiny, her actions looked exactly as Crawford intended, like the whims of a lonely woman with too much power and too little judgment. "Is it?" Crawford leaned forward, his eyes glittering with triumph. "You've been seen with this man multiple times. Your personal foundation paid his mother's medical bills. You created a fake consulting position for him." Tell me, Victoria, what would our shareholders think about their CEO's charitable inclinations? Board member Margaret Chen cleared her throat delicately. Victoria, while your personal life is your own concern, any appearance of impropriety could affect stock prices, especially with the quarterly reports due next week. There's no impropriety, Victoria insisted, but the words felt hollow. How could she explain that Marcus had given her something money couldn't buy, a glimpse of what it meant to choose kindness over self-preservation? Crawford's phone buzzed and his smile became genuinely predatory. Actually, there's more. He turned his laptop screen toward the table, revealing a news website with a breaking story. Tech billionaire's charity case. Security guard speaks out. Victoria's heart stopped. There on the screen was Marcus, looking haggard and defensive outside St. Mary's Hospital, surrounded by reporters with microphones thrust toward his face like weapons. "I never asked for her help," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying the exhausted dignity of a man pushed beyond his limits. "My mother and I can take care of ourselves. Miss Sterling needs to understand that poor people aren't her personal charity projects." The words hit Victoria like physical blows. She watched Marcus's face on the screen, saw the humiliation in his eyes, the way he kept touching his father's jacket like a talisman against the invasion of his privacy. "The story's already trending on social media," Crawford continued conversationally. "Something about wealthy women collecting poor men like accessories. Quite damaging to your reputation, I imagine." Victoria's phone was buzzing incessantly. Her publicist, her lawyers, her assistant fielding calls from reporters who had somehow gotten her direct line. The careful privacy she had built around her life was crumbling in real time. "Here's my offer," Crawford said, sliding a contract across the table. "Resign as CEO, sell me your controlling shares at market value, and this all goes away. Fight me, and I'll make sure every embarrassing detail of your relationship with the security guard becomes front-page news." Board member David Walsh spoke up, his voice carefully neutral. "Victoria, perhaps we should consider the company's best interests. A scandal like this could affect our IPO expansion plans." Victoria looked around the table at faces she had known for years, people she had trusted with her vision and her company's future. Now they were calculating her worth against the cost of controversy, measuring her leadership against the price of public relations damage. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Victoria could see the lights of the city where Marcus was probably dealing with reporters, where Dorothy was watching her son's humiliation on the evening news, where their quiet connection had been turned into a weapon of mass destruction. "I need time to consider," Victoria said finally. "You have until tomorrow morning," Crawford replied, standing with the satisfaction of a man who had played his cards perfectly. "The board votes at 9 a.m. Choose wisely, Victoria. Some games are too expensive to lose." As the boardroom emptied, Victoria remained seated, staring at the photographs scattered across the table. In them, she could see the truth Crawford had twisted into lies, the genuine care in Marcus's eyes, the maternal warmth in Dorothy's face, the possibility of love that existed beyond the boundaries of wealth and status. Now she had less than 12 hours to decide whether that love was worth fighting for, or if some dreams were too dangerous to pursue. The media circus descended on Marcus Thompson's life like locusts on wheat fields. By Thursday morning, news vans lined the street outside his Richmond District apartment building, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like metallic prayers for scandal. Reporters ambushed him at every turn, leaving for work, returning from the grocery store, visiting his mother at the hospital where she was recovering from her latest insulin crisis. "Mr. Thompson, is it true you've been accepting money from Victoria Sterling?" The questions came like machine gun fire, each one designed to wound. "How long have you been in a relationship with the billionaire CEO? Did you plan this from the beginning?" Marcus pushed through the crowd with his head down, His father's jacket pulled tight around his shoulders like armor that had lost its protective power. The leather that had once symbolized honest work and family pride now felt like evidence in a trial he never asked to participate in. The security company called him into the office on Friday afternoon. Marcus sat across from his supervisor's desk while the man he'd worked for 3 years avoided eye contact and shuffled papers with nervous energy. "Look, Thompson, you're a good worker," Jim Martinez said, his voice carrying the regret of a man forced to make decisions based on liability rather than loyalty. "But this media attention is affecting building operations. Tenants are complaining about reporters in the lobby. The management company is getting nervous." Marcus felt the last pillar of his carefully constructed life begin to crumble. "Jim, you know me. You know I'd never do anything to compromise building security." "I know that," Martinez replied, finally meeting his eyes. "But perception is reality in this business. The company can't afford to look like we're part of some scandal, even if it's all bullshit." The termination paperwork felt heavier than it should have, each signature a nail in the coffin of Marcus's dignity. 3 years of perfect attendance, impeccable performance reviews, and genuine respect, all erased by circumstances beyond his control. At the hospital that evening, Marcus found Dorothy watching the news coverage of his firing with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. The TV showed file footage of Victoria entering her building, followed by Marcus's humiliating press conference outside the hospital, then a panel of talking heads debating the ethics of charity relationships. "Turn it off, Mama," Marcus said, reaching for the remote. "No," Dorothy said firmly, her voice carrying steel despite her tears. "I need to see what they're doing to my son." The news anchor's voice filled the sterile hospital room. "Sources close to Sterling Tech suggest that CEO Victoria Sterling may have violated company ethics policies by using corporate funds for personal relationships. The board is expected to meet tomorrow to discuss her future with the company." Marcus sank into the plastic chair beside his mother's bed, feeling the weight of unintended consequences crushing his chest. "This is all my fault. I should have just taken the jacket back and walked away." Dorothy turned to face him, her clouded eyes fierce with maternal protection. "Marcus Thompson, don't you dare take responsibility for other people's cruelty. You showed kindness to a stranger, and they're trying to make that into something dirty." "But look what it's cost." Marcus gestured at the TV where his photo was displayed next to Victoria's like mugshots. "She's going to lose her company because of me." "You're stuck in this hospital bed because I was too proud to accept help. Everyone I touch gets hurt." "You listen to me, son," Dorothy said, her voice carrying the authority of a woman who had seen war and poverty and the worst of human nature. "That girl needs you more than she knows. Not your gratitude, not your guilt. She needs your heart, and you need hers." "How can you say that? Look at this mess." Dorothy struggled to sit up higher in her hospital bed, her hands trembling but determined. "Because I've lived long enough to know the difference between a storm and the end of the world. Storms pass, baby. Love doesn't." Outside the hospital window, San Francisco glittered in the evening light. 42 floors up, Victoria Sterling was preparing for the battle of her professional life, unaware that the man she was fighting for had already surrendered to despair. The television droned on with speculation and analysis, but Marcus no longer heard the words. He sat holding his mother's hand, watching the city lights blur through tears, wondering if some acts of kindness carried too high a price for anyone to afford. The manila envelope arrived at Victoria's penthouse at 6:47 a.m., delivered by a private investigator whose face carried the grim satisfaction of someone who had unearthed buried treasure. Victoria's hands trembled as she opened it, coffee growing cold on her marble countertop, while the morning news played her professional obituary in the background. The first photograph stopped her heart, black and white, dated 30 years ago. A young trauma nurse holding a newborn baby in the chaotic aftermath of a car accident. The nurse's face was younger, unmarked by time and diabetes, but unmistakably Dorothy Thompson. The baby, swaddled in a hospital blanket, was impossibly small and vulnerable. Victoria's breath caught in her throat as she read the investigator's report. Subject: Dorothy Thompson, trauma nurse, St. Mary's Hospital, 1993. Emergency response to Highway 101 collision involving James and Catherine Sterling, deceased. Infant survivor: Victoria Sterling, age 8 months. The world tilted sideways. Victoria gripped the counter as 30 years of buried memory tried to surface through the fog of infant trauma. She had always known her parents died in a car accident, had always wondered about the missing pieces of that night, who had held her, who had kept her alive until social services arrived. The second photograph showed Dorothy's personnel file from 1993, including a disciplinary note. Nurse Thompson violated protocol by remaining with infant victim for 3 hours beyond her shift. Commendable dedication but unauthorized overtime will not be compensated. Victoria's throat constricted. Dorothy had stayed with her, unpaid, holding a stranger's baby through the worst night of both their lives. The woman who was now rationing insulin because she couldn't afford her medication had once given freely of herself to save Victoria's life. But the third photograph shattered everything she thought she knew about destiny and coincidence. It showed a man's jacket, tagged as evidence from the accident scene. The description read, "Brown leather jacket, property of James Sterling, deceased, donated to hospital staff as per family request." Victoria's legs gave out. She sank onto her kitchen stool, staring at the photograph of her father's jacket. The same jacket Marcus had been wearing, the same jacket he had given her that night at the bus stop. The leather that had protected her father, then warmed his daughter 30 years later through the kindness of the nurse's son. The investigator's final note was clinical in its precision. Dorothy Thompson appears to have kept the jacket as a memento, later giving it to her son Marcus. The circular nature of this connection suggests either extraordinary coincidence or deliberate orchestration. No evidence of premeditation found. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "Board meeting moved to 8 a.m. Harrison demanding immediate vote. Need you here now." But Victoria couldn't move. She sat surrounded by photographs that rewrote her entire understanding of love and fate, holding proof that the universe sometimes arranged second chances across decades. Marcus hadn't found her by accident. He had been carrying her father's protection all along, raised by the woman who had been her first guardian angel. The investigation had uncovered more than connections. It had revealed Harrison Crawford's true identity. Birth name: Harry Cohen, foster child in the same system that had claimed Victoria from ages 10 to 14. They had lived in the same group home for 4 years, during which Victoria's fierce independence and academic brilliance had overshadowed his desperate need for approval. The psychological profile painted a picture of obsession masquerading as business rivalry. Harrison had changed his name, built his wealth, and positioned himself in Victoria's orbit, not for corporate conquest, but for personal revenge against the girl who had never noticed his childhood devotion. His systematic acquisition of Sterling Tech shares, his careful manipulation of the media, his orchestration of Victoria's downfall, all of it stemmed from the wounded pride of a 14-year-old boy who had never learned to transform rejection into resilience. Victoria's hands shook as she reached for her phone. She had 30 minutes before the board meeting that would determine her fate, but first she needed to call the one person who could help her understand the magnitude of what had been revealed. "Dorothy?" Victoria's voice cracked as the older woman answered. "It's Victoria Sterling. I need to see you. Right now." "Child, what's wrong?" "You sound like you've seen a ghost." "I have," Victoria whispered. "I've seen mine." 25 minutes later, Victoria sat in Dorothy's hospital room, the photographs spread across the rolling table like tarot cards revealing an impossible future. Dorothy's weathered fingers traced the edges of the images, her clouded eyes focusing with the intensity of someone recognizing a long-buried truth. "I remember this night," Dorothy said softly, touching the photograph of herself holding baby Victoria. "Worst car accident I'd ever responded to. Your parents. There was nothing we could do for them. But you were so small, so perfect. You kept trying to open your eyes, like you were looking for someone." "You stayed with me," Victoria said, her voice thick with 30 years of delayed gratitude. "Course I did, honey. Babies shouldn't be alone in the world, not if someone can help it." Dorothy's smile carried the weight of maternal memory. "I kept that jacket because it smelled like your daddy's cologne. Thought maybe someday it might comfort you if you ever needed to remember where you came from." Victoria understood now why Marcus's presence had felt like coming home, why his kindness had pierced through her carefully constructed defenses. She had been responding to something deeper than attraction. She had been recognizing the love that had shaped the man who wore her father's protection. "I gave the jacket to Marcus when he turned 18, Dorothy continued. Told him it belonged to a good man who loved his family. Seemed right that it should go to another good man who loved his." The hospital room fell silent except for the steady beep of Dorothy's monitors and the distant sounds of morning shift changes. Victoria looked at her watch, 7:52 a.m. In 8 minutes her board would vote on her future, but for the first time in her adult life, the outcome felt less important than the revelation. "Mrs. Thompson," Victoria said, taking the older woman's hand, "I need to ask you something. If I lose my company today, if I lose everything I've built, would you and Marcus still want me in your lives?" Dorothy's laugh was soft and knowing. "Child, we wanted you in our lives before we knew you had a company to lose. You think love comes with a balance sheet?" Victoria kissed Dorothy's forehead, tasting salt from tears she didn't remember shedding. As she left the hospital, the photographs clutched against her chest like a shield. She finally understood that some battles were worth fighting not for what you might win, but for who you might become in the fighting. The Sterling Tech building loomed ahead, 42 floors of glass and steel that had once represented her entire world. Now it felt like just a place where she worked, not the fortress that defined her worth. Harrison Crawford was waiting. The Sterling Tech boardroom had never felt smaller. Victoria entered at exactly 8 o'clock a.m., her heels clicking against marble with the steady rhythm of someone walking toward either salvation or execution. The manila envelope containing 30 years of buried truth rested in her briefcase like a loaded weapon. She wasn't sure she had the courage to fire. Harrison Crawford sat at the far end of the table, his silver hair catching the morning light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows. His smile was predatory, confident, the expression of a man who believed he had already won. The board members avoided Victoria's eyes, their discomfort palpable in the recycled air of corporate anxiety. "Victoria," Harrison said, his voice carrying mock concern. "I'm glad you decided to join us. I was beginning to worry you might not show." Victoria took her seat at the head of the table, setting her briefcase down with deliberate precision. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, Harry." The use of his childhood name sent a flicker of uncertainty across Harrison's features, the first crack in his polished facade. He recovered quickly, but Victoria had seen the momentary falter, the flash of the wounded boy hiding beneath the businessman's armor. "The board has reviewed the evidence of your inappropriate relationship with an employee," board member Margaret Chen began, her voice carefully neutral. "While we appreciate your contributions to the company, the potential for scandal—" "There is no inappropriate relationship," Victoria interrupted, her voice carrying a calm certainty that surprised even herself. "But there is a story you need to hear before you make any decisions about my future with this company." She opened her briefcase and withdrew the photographs, placing them on the table with the reverence of someone handling sacred artifacts. The black and white image of Dorothy holding baby Victoria drew sharp intakes of breath from several board members. 30 years ago, a trauma nurse named Dorothy Thompson saved my life, Victoria began, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. Not through medical intervention, my parents were already gone. She saved me by refusing to let me face the world alone. Harrison's confident smile began to fade as Victoria continued, his fingers drumming against the mahogany table with increasing agitation. That nurse gave up her pay to stay with me for 3 hours, holding me while social services arranged placement. She kept my father's jacket as a reminder of the family I'd lost, eventually giving it to her son when he came of age. Victoria's eyes found Harrison's across the table. That son grew up to be Marcus Thompson, the security guard who gave me his jacket, my father's jacket, on a cold night when I needed kindness more than I needed wealth. The room was silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of San Francisco traffic 42 floors below. Victoria placed the second photograph on the table, Dorothy's personnel file with its notation about unauthorized overtime. Marcus Thompson has never asked me for anything. He's refused my help repeatedly, choosing pride over comfort because his mother raised him to understand that character isn't measured by what you receive, but by what you give. Victoria's voice grew stronger with each word. His mother, who is currently in the hospital with diabetic complications, is the same woman who held me through the worst night of my life. Board member David Walsh leaned forward, studying the photographs with the intensity of someone trying to solve a complex equation. This is extraordinary. But Victoria, even if this connection exists, it doesn't address the public relations nightmare or the appearance of impropriety. Doesn't it? Victoria stood, moving to the windows that overlooked the city where Marcus was probably job hunting, where Dorothy was recovering, where their quiet love story had been turned into tabloid scandal. For 5 years, you've watched me build this company with ruthless efficiency. You've praised my ability to maximize profits and minimize human variables. But what if I told you that approach was killing us slowly? She turned back to face the room, her reflection ghost-like in the glass behind her. Our employee satisfaction scores are at an all-time low. Our turnover rate is astronomical. We're profitable, but we're not sustainable, because we've forgotten that technology serves people, not the other way around. Harrison stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward with the force of his movement. This is ridiculous corporate theater, Victoria. You can't philosophy your way out of a scandal. Can't I? Victoria opened her briefcase again, withdrawing a second manila envelope. Because I have another story to tell. This one about a foster child named Harry Cohen, who changed his name to Harrison Crawford and spent 20 years orchestrating revenge against a girl who never knew he existed. The color drained from Harrison's face as Victoria placed his original birth certificate on the table alongside the childhood photos from their shared group home. The progression was damning. A lonely boy's face, hardening into calculated ambition, his desperate need for approval transforming into the desire for control. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had finally found her truth. "You're not voting on whether to remove a CEO who made poor personal choices. You're voting on whether to hand our company to a man whose entire business strategy is based on a childhood grudge." The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Board members who had been prepared to debate ethical violations now found themselves staring at evidence of systematic manipulation spanning decades. Harrison's careful acquisition of shares, his strategic timing of the hostile takeover, his orchestration of the media scandal, all of it took on a sinister new dimension. "Harry," Victoria said softly, using his childhood name like a key to unlock 30 years of buried pain. I remember you now. You used to leave drawings under my pillow at the group home. You'd save your dessert for me when I had nightmares. You were kind then." Harrison's composure finally cracked completely. "You never even looked at me." The words exploded from him with the force of decades of suppressed rejection. "I was invisible to you then, just like everyone else who didn't fit your plan for perfect achievement." "You're right," Victoria said, and the admission seemed to physically stagger him. "I was so focused on surviving, on escaping, that I never saw the people who cared about me. I'm sorry for that hurt, Harry, but destroying me won't heal it." The boardroom fell silent as 30 years of misunderstood rejection hung in the air between them. Harrison slumped in his chair, the silver-haired corporate predator dissolving back into the wounded 14-year-old boy who had never learned that love couldn't be demanded or orchestrated. Victoria returned to her seat, placing one final photograph on the table. Marcus and Dorothy together in the hospital, his hand covering hers while she slept. "This is what I've learned from Marcus Thompson and his mother. Love isn't a transaction. It's not something you earn through achievement or extract through manipulation. It's something you give freely, without guarantee of return." She looked around the table at faces that had known her for years but had never really seen her. "I'm not asking you to approve of my relationship with Marcus, though I hope someday you'll understand it. I'm asking you to approve of a vision for Sterling Tech that puts human connection at the center of technological innovation." Margaret Chen spoke first, her voice thoughtful. "The company's performance under your leadership has been exemplary. If these personal attacks are based on childhood grievances rather than legitimate business concerns—" David Walsh nodded slowly. "The hostile takeover never made strategic sense. Now we know why." One by one, the board members voiced their continued confidence in Victoria's leadership. Harrison sat in stunned silence as his carefully constructed revenge collapsed around him, the votes he had counted on evaporating like morning fog. As the meeting concluded and board members filed out in quiet conversation, Harrison remained seated, staring at the photographs scattered across the table like evidence of his own broken heart. "Harry," Victoria said softly, approaching him as the room emptied, "it's not too late to be the kind person you used to be." He looked up at her with eyes that carried 30 years of misdirected pain. "How can you forgive me after what I've done to you?" To him. "Because someone recently taught me that holding on to hurt only hurts the person carrying it," Victoria replied. "And because the boy who saved his dessert for me deserves the chance to find his way back to kindness." As Victoria left the Sterling Tech building for what felt like the first time in years, she carried with her the photographs that had saved her company and the hard-won knowledge that some stories take 30 years to reach their proper ending. Marcus was waiting for her at the bus stop where their story began, wearing his father's jacket and holding 2 cups of coffee, his smile carrying the patient warmth of someone who had finally learned to accept love without questioning his worthiness to receive it. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about finding someone new. They're about finding your way back to the kindness you thought the world had forgotten. At 68, Dorothy Thompson understood what many of us learned too late, that the small acts of grace we offer strangers can echo across decades, creating connections we never imagined possible. When her son Marcus gave his jacket to a shivering woman at that bus stop, he was continuing a legacy of compassion that had begun 30 years earlier when Dorothy held a stranger's baby through the longest night of both their lives. For those of us who've lived long enough to see how quickly life can change, how suddenly health can fail, how easily pride can isolate us from the help we need, this story reminds us that love isn't about being strong enough to never need anyone. It's about being brave enough to accept the kindness that comes our way and wise enough to pass it forward. Dorothy's final gift to Marcus and Victoria wasn't just her blessing. It was the understanding that family isn't just who you're born to, but who chooses to stay when life gets difficult. What act of unexpected kindness changed your life? Have you ever discovered that a stranger was connected to your past in ways you never imagined? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.